Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Kuntz at Cool Choices, and I'm delighted you could join me today to talk about the power of public commitment. I think this is going to be a fun topic. So just as a bit of background for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Cool Choices is a nonprofit. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin, and we use behavioral science to inspire individuals, businesses, and whole communities to adopt sustainable practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we're really in the world of thinking about what motivates people to take action and how do we get them to take more action more quickly, which relates very much to our topic today, which is the power of public commitments. You know, the use of public commitments around climate change has been on a rapid rise of late. There are lots of good examples of this that kind of inspired us to talk about this. So this is a screen capture from the Sierra Club website. They have an initiative to get more than 100 cities, I think they're over 100 now, committing to 100% clean energy. So they've got a lot of public entities making commitments around dramatic climate action. You also see a variety of commitments in the private sector. You've got companies like Walmart and Levi Strauss and Apple making bold commitments about how they're going to change their resource use, how they're going to reuse products, recycle more, reduce their emissions, etc. And maybe the best big example of this movement to commitment is the We Are Still In initiative, where you've got 3,600 entities. Those are cities and counties, school districts, universities, businesses, faith communities, who are all committing to fulfill their piece of the U.S. obligations under the Paris Climate Treaty, even if the United States as a federal entity steps back from that treaty. So you've got, again, 3,600 entities there representing 154 million Americans who are making a commitment. We're going to do this. That's, pretty dramatic commitments. And of course, it begs this question, do commitments matter? So people signed up and said they would do this. What does that matter? I said I wouldn't drink as much caffeine, and I'm still drinking caffeine. So, is our commitments real? Does this matter? And the first thing I'll tell you from a kind of behavioral science perspective is it makes a lot of difference whether those commitments are public or not. So when commitments are essentially anonymous, when I commit to something without adding my name to it in a public way, it's not very effective compared to when it's public. And, I think about my early career was in energy efficiency. I remember working years and years and years ago with a utility that had this program where businesses committed to buy efficient products, but the list of businesses who committed was never public. And at one point, when we really were pushing that issue with the utility, someone there said, well, if we publicized it, some of those businesses would be surprised to see themselves on the list. And that's exactly the problem you don't want to have. You want a commitment to be something that people know they've committed to. And why you want that is because this whole thing about commitments essentially leverages this sort of magical quirk in human behavior. So we all tend to be a little self-centered at the end of the day. I presume people are paying attention to what I'm doing. I presume people remember what I wore to an event when I last saw them, even though I couldn't for the life of me tell you what they wore. I think people remember what I said in a meeting and whether it's inconsistent with something I said somewhere else. So when I make a public commitment, my bias, my human bias, which all of us have, it's very clearly documented, our bias is that people will remember we made that commitment and they might ask us about it. They might follow up and find out if we saw that through, if we had the integrity to deliver what we promised. And that's essentially what you're leveraging with a commitment. So it doesn't work when it's anonymous, because when it's anonymous, you can't kind of tie it back to me. The whole point of commitments is that it needs to be public. So people are seeing that kind of public commitment. We're going to reduce our emissions 20% by 2020. Okay, but you can tie that back to us. And as a related note here, I think a kind of parallel concept that's really important here is benchmarking. Benchmarking is hot, particularly at the city level. You see lots of communities implementing benchmarking programs where they're essentially comparing the energy use of buildings so they can see who uses the least energy, who uses the most energy. And the point here isn't to shame people who are using a lot, it's to make more transparent what that performance is. And again, when that performance is transparent, people are motivated to change what they're doing. People don't want to appear in the bottom quartile of that data. That becomes a really motivating thing. And so really benchmarking, you can think of it as a way to give people a sense of where they are in the race. Are we at the front of the pack? Or are we at the back of the pack? Some organizations will say we want to be at the front of the pack. If there's data about how we're performing, we want to be at the top of that list. Other folks will be perfectly okay being in the middle of the pack, but they need to know what that data is to be in the middle. And again, benchmarking works much better when that data is public and people have a sense that other people might look at this. They might look at this big list of facilities and search us out in that. Probably they won't in reality, but that impetus can be something that's a really powerful tool. And so I kind of say all of that as background because I want to spend a little time today really thinking about, you are a leader in sustainability. And so one of the things you can have in your toolbox is this idea of public commitment. But it's a powerful tool. You can kind of squeeze value out of it only if you really use it appropriately. In the same way that a hammer is a powerful tool when you're pounding nails, but less so when you're trying to, screw in a screw kind of thing. So I want to really just focus today a little bit on how do you use public commitments to sort of wring the most value out of them. And the first point is this one that I've been making in various ways, about how the more public a commitment is, the better. And one of the things, I was in a conversation recently with an elected official who said, I can't even keep track anymore. We've committed to so many things around climate, who can keep track of them? And I thought, oh no, that's exactly not how we want you to think about that. I want you as my elected official to feel really accountable for the things you've committed to. And that means that those commitments need to be really public. So here's my sort of ideal image of this. You've got the leader making that commitment, but they're surrounded by their key staff who are also making that commitment. If you're in an organization, if you get the CEO to at a meeting stand up and assert these are our climate commitments, we're going to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030. You want the head of procurement and the VP of hiring and plant operations and all of those folks standing around the CEO as part of that group that's accountable. Because dollars to donuts, 6 months from now, you're going to be doing something and you're going to need the cooperation of procurement, and knowing that that person was standing on the stage, shared in that commitment, gives you some leverage. So really thinking about how do you make this as public as possible. And I would say that in cases where you're thinking, well, it's too late, Kathy. We committed to stuff and, you know, people signed off on it in a room with nobody else there, and then we just started doing. It's never too late to make it public. Maybe as part of an upcoming all staff meeting or board meeting, there's a discussion of, we made this commitment. There's something that makes it more public. There's more eyeballs on the folks who made that commitment, making them feel more than a little bit accountable for what they did. So the more public, the better. The second thing to really think about with these commitments is that once you've got commitments, you want to be really transparently monitoring progress toward the goal. So if we committed to a 30% reduction in energy use by 2030, it's 2019, where are we at now? Where will we be next year? How are we doing on those projections? Okay, a couple of things here. We all know what gets counted is what matters. So in a sense, you're leveraging off of that commitment to make sure that those sustainability commitments have high profile, but you're also increasing the visibility and reinforcing that kind of public accountability. We said we were going to do this. This is where we are. You're also making that commitment much more real to all of the folks on the ground who need to believe in that commitment. Okay, all the rank and file staff who contribute in one way or another to whether that commitment is achieved, who are going to decide whether they want to stay working for this organization based on whether there are commitments that are consistent with their values. All kinds of reasons why you want that to sort of be a thing, that there's ongoing dialogue about the progress. As you're having that dialogue, really, really, really important is that you celebrate the victories. And you know, we searched a long time for an image for this slide because I wanted this like unmitigated, complete joy at the victory image for you to absorb here. What I see so often is when sustainability leads achieve an accomplishment, they're already looking at the next mountain to be climbed, and they're like, yep, we did that, but you know, it's going to be a lot harder to reduce energy use the next 2%, and I can't really, and for this to work, you need to become really disciplined and take a full 5 minutes in a very public way when you have a success to celebrate that success. To go, we have reduced our waste to landfill 30%. We're on track with our objectives here. We have reduced water consumption 5% in our manufacturing processes. Whatever it is, you take that victory and do a victory lap and let everyone else join you on that victory lap before you start ruminating about the next thing that's going to be really hard. You're right, the next thing is going to be really hard. But give it time. Take a moment and really let people celebrate what happened, because those celebrations sort of become the nourishment that gives people the oomph they need to go for the next piece. And it is good. Okay, what any number of you are doing right now to reduce your impact is significant. So let's celebrate those. Let's be really disciplined about celebrating them. A couple of other things here. I think you want to be always thinking about how you can show the change that is happening. And this, you know, ties to that transparency about the goals, but also where do people find out that good things are happening. I have a personal obsession that I think people don't recognize electric vehicles on the road, so I'm always looking for opportunities to kind of educate folks about where there is an electric vehicle. And ultimately what that's all about is having more dialogue about these commitments and the progress toward these commitments. And that's both for you as the sustainability lead who's making that change happen, but also as a constituent in systems where that change is happening. So, for example, I live in a community where there is a community commitment to 100% renewable energy. Periodically, I check in with my alderperson about how they think we're doing on that system. I also bring it up at dinner with friends who aren't in the industry. Hey, did you know we have this commitment? How do you think that's going to affect what happens in your world? How is your business preparing for that? Trying to make that much more visible that we as a community have made this commitment. How is it going to affect all the things that we do together as a community? Essentially making that commitment more real. In those conversations, I'm essentially saying to my friends, hey, you and I together are part of this bigger commitment that our community has made. What are you and I going to do to make sure that that commitment is fulfilled? Are you thinking about this commitment? The more I talk about that with different people, the more real that becomes, the more they think, oh, we're part of that commitment. What are we doing to make that happen? How are we going to be part of the solution here? Creating all of those ripples of influence. I want everyone in my sphere to be thinking about how they're also accountable for this public commitment we've made. They're part of this community. What are they doing to make that true? So it's really simple as talking about it, both with the folks who are going to make decisions in this, but also rank and file people, whether that's neighbors or colleagues or folks from other departments, to make that all real and shared as a commitment. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it, because again, makes it more public. And with that, I like to keep these short. I'm about in my right time frame. We have time for a couple of questions. So someone says, I'm a little cynical. Do these commitments really matter? There's actually, I just yesterday saw some data from the Carbon Disclosure Project. So they work with cities and large businesses to estimate their annual carbon emissions, and they've got some interesting new graphs. When I get my hands on these, I didn't get them in time for today's webinar, but I'll share them on social media and places so you all can see them. And what they're seeing is indeed that when communities are making these commitments and tracking how they're doing against the commitments, they're outperforming other communities in a pretty significant way. So I think there's increasing data, and certainly we've seen for a long time data from other fields. If you think about public health issues, one of the reasons why the public health community says that if you're going to go on a diet or start a new exercise program, you should find a buddy or you should tell people you're doing this, is to create that personal accountability. Okay, all of that advice is geared exactly toward these same findings. So I think it's okay to be a little skeptical, because that will push you to push folks to get results, but definitely public commitments do matter. Oh, and then a question about, so our company is slow to make these commitments. How do we encourage leadership to think about these commitments? I really think, and looking at the list I had at the beginning of all the entities that are making commitments in various ways, I think we're at a good place for you to just use some social norms in terms of look at which of our competitors are making commitments, are talking about what they're accomplishing in terms of commitments. We want to be part of that. We want to get some of that love from our customers, from investors. There's a ton of reasons increasingly why companies are making public commitments and then seeing those commitments through. And so I would encourage you to look at some of that. We've probably got a number of blog posts and some other webinars that talk about that you can access on demand. I am not seeing other questions. So with that, I'm going to let you all get back to the important work you do. Thank you so much for all you are doing to make sustainability happen in companies, in communities across the country. We very much appreciate all you do. Thanks so much for joining me today, and have a great rest of your day.